This week, we're going to talk about how to defeat temptation. Now, for some, when you hear that word defeat temptation, you immediately become discouraged because it's discouraging when we feel like we succumb to the same temptation time and time again. And we just want to get free from that hopeless cycle of hope and failure. And maybe you're not coming to church right now because you think, I've got to defeat this sin in my life first, or the struggle. And I just want to say, come. Because it's our desire and it's our hope and it's our expectation that every one of us can come through those doors all the way to the cross, because Jesus is the only one who's able to clean us up. So I want to give you hope that victory is possible, because what I believe is if the idea of defeating temptation is discouraging to you, you would give almost anything to be set free from that. And what I want to be able to say is Jesus has come to be your rescuer, and Jesus didn't just come to do something on a cross a long time ago so that if you chose, you could go to heaven. What Jesus did by coming to earth was he came to rescue you and to defeat the power of temptation and sin and death in your life. And that's when we say he is the rescuer. It's the whole kit and caboodle. It's not he did something so you could go somewhere. He did something. He came for you because he wants a relationship with you through eternity. Why bother with temptation if I'm going to be forgiven anyway? Isn't that what a rescuer's for? Well, maybe right now the only reason you're interested in defeating temptation is your fear that God will get you if you don't. Others, there's a fear of going to hell, or that your wife will leave you, or fear that your kids don't respect you, and you feel like you've got to overcome it, whatever it is. But every one of those reasons that I just outlined, those are real to many of us, and they have been real at some time to all of us. But yet every one of those reasons produces exhaustion, it produces fear, and it produces failure when on our own. And so to you who say, why would I want to defeat temptation? I'm going to say victory is desirable. Because when you and I, we would rather defeat the power of temptation that is wielded in our life right now. We feel a slave and we don't like it. And yet there may be just being resigned to it. Because I believe, regardless of your attitude of discouragement or being nonchalant, I believe you'd rather stop giving control of your life, your marriage, your career, your family, whatever it is, control of what controls you. So, wouldn't you like to see how Jesus can rescue us from the power of temptation? It says in chapter 2, verse 18, that he's able to help. Because he himself suffered when he was tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. Now, we know where we are in there. We're the ones who are being tempted. We're in the present tense, right here and now. But the rest of that, to realize that applies to Jesus, is kind of cool. You mean he was tempted? I mean, he actually suffered when he was tempted? And because he suffered when he was tempted, he's able to help. Well, something interesting to me is Jesus knowing all things. I don't think he was clueless when he went to the wilderness, do you? He knew he was going there for spiritual battle, for spiritual warfare. How did he prepare? He fasted. I don't think he got there and said, oh, I forgot my food. Oh, well, I guess I'm going to fast. I don't think he even set a goal for how long he was going to fast, because what we see here is a correlation with the length of the battle and the length of the fast. He purposed himself to fast for spiritual warfare. So what do we observe here? Trusting what God has spoken through Scripture brings power. It brings clarity. And when we use the Scripture properly, it cuts through, it reveals deception and lies. Now, we can all go through this, and we can learn a lot about the techniques Jesus used to defeat temptation. What did he use? He fasted. We don't understand why, but we can fast and see if it works. He quoted Scripture, and we can come up with some Scripture, and we can quote that, and it is true. And yet, we can do all the things that Jesus did, and still not come out victorious. Why? Well, the real question is the power of temptation comes in not what Jesus did, but why he did it. Why was Jesus able to suck the power out of temptation? The power of temptation diminishes not when we employ the right techniques, but the power of temptation diminishes as our desire for God grows. You see, when our desire for God is greater, we find a way out. Paul wrote to the church in Corinth, "There's no temptation that you can't overcome. And in every temptation, my Father will provide a way out if you want it." But that's why temptation only loses its power when we see it as threatening the relationship that we value more. You see, that's the thing that temptation does. Temptation occurs, James said, when we're dragged away by our own evil desires. You see what temptation does? It reveals what our greatest desires are. The power is in our desires. Because if we didn't desire a shortcut, if we didn't desire relief, if we didn't desire someone or something else, there would be no temptation. And what Jesus was able to do, because his love for his Father was so great, he saw every temptation not just for what it presented, but for what it affected. The key to defeating temptation isn't in the techniques we employ, but it's in the love that grows for our Father. And when we recognize everything for what it is, a threat to that relationship, things get less tempting. And the power, that's the only way the power will diminish. So why do you want to defeat temptation? Is it to make life easier? I just want to get this over with so I don't have to keep facing this anymore. But you see, by moving from religion to relationship, moves us from have to want to. And when our want to becomes heavenly instead of earthly, temptation loses its power. And so the power of temptation, the real story of Jesus' time in the wilderness, wasn't his techniques, was his love for his Father. Because the power of temptation only diminishes it always diminishes as our love for our Father grows.